Hello and welcome to the AMP podcast. I'm Noam, and joining me today is my co-host Jared. In this episode, we'll be delving into an important topic, especially at this time in Israel, where we're currently located. That topic is the profound impact of trauma and PTSD, with a focus on the family dynamic. We'll be tailoring our discussion towards teenagers and young adults, a population at risk for traumatic experiences. This short form episode is for those that are curious to learn more about mental health and trauma. You can find relevant resources linked below the interview, including references, and we hope you enjoy the discussion.
Hi, Noam. I'm excited for this conversation. I want to delve into the details of trauma a bit more. As background, from my understanding, trauma is an emotional response caused by exposure to distressing events that are beyond normal expectations. But I think our audience might be interested and could greatly benefit from a discussion about figuring out if they have experienced trauma in the past. What would a person be thinking and feeling if they have gone through trauma in the past or are going through it now?
Right, that's a great question, Jared. So trauma really looks different for everyone. Some people might be more resilient, at least initially, to symptoms, while others may have the more classic symptoms of PTSD. And first, I just want to explain traumatic stress versus PTSD. So initially, traumatic stress and PTSD could look very similar, following some sort of, disturbing event, but they're going to progress very differently. And according to the American Psychological Association, trauma is a response to a terrible event, and individuals can experience more than one type of trauma. So even though the symptoms of traumatic stress can be really unpleasant, eventually they do get a little bit better. But if the traumatic stress symptoms don't ease, and in fact, sometimes even get worse, the nervous system sort of gets stuck, and that is what we would define as PTSD. So it's important to remember that everyone responds really differently to traumatic events, which means that you and your friend might be experiencing PTSD or trauma, but act completely differently. Classically, there are certain emotions associated. There may be intense feelings of fear, sadness, anger, or anxiety. Somebody may also have really intrusive thoughts. They may have nightmares relating to the event and a difficulty concentrating. Emotionally, they could be detached and distant and sort of have avoidance behavior. Some people may even have trouble sleeping and eating. And I just want to mention that in teens and adolescents specifically, studies show that there is an increased risk for substance abuse. So it's really important to keep a lookout to see if your friends or siblings, if they have experienced some sort of event that you would consider traumatic, just to make sure that they're doing okay.
So what does trauma actually do to our bodies? Like, what's the science behind trauma?
Right. So I want to go over a bit of what's going on in the brain. So there's three areas of the brain that are important, within trauma and processing trauma. They're the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. So we're going to go through each one and talk about it a bit. So the amygdala is a part of the brain that's responsible for emotions like anger, fear, or the classic fight or flight reflex. And they've done research on soldiers, and they found that the amygdala was not able to differentiate between a past threat, right, like when they were fighting an enemy during war, and a current threat, like a loud noise walking down the street or on the train or subway. So reminders of past experiences can make someone experiencing PTSD as if they're experiencing it for the first time. This makes them stressed and often super reactive and on high alert. So that's the first thing, the amygdala. The second aspect is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a part of the brain that's in charge of learning and making memories. So research shows that the hippocampus actually shrinks in size, so it's less active in those that have experienced trauma and are experiencing PTSD. So it can be really hard for those that experience that trauma to focus and to learn new things, to remember and to differentiate between past memories of their trauma and sort of the present moment. And the third thing is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is really in charge of decision making. And research shows that the prefrontal cortex is less active in those that have experienced trauma. And this can, of course, make it hard to think logically and can make day-to-day decision making challenging and really frustrating for anyone that's experiencing PTSD.
So to touch on a particular aspect of life that trauma affects, let's dive into a super important one. So talk a bit about how trauma affects family life and the family dynamic.
So trauma in a situation may affect an individual person, but it really doesn't just affect them. It affects everyone that's connected, especially in their social circle. This is especially true with an adolescent, a teenager, a young adult that have larger social circles and maybe living at home and have younger siblings and parents at home. So as we mentioned, trauma can make someone more irritable and angry, which of course we can imagine can negatively affect all the relationships in the home. Depending on the type of trauma, a person may experiencing something called traumatic grief, and that may make them a little bit more distant, which can be hard for the whole family when the family's trying to connect. Teenagers or anyone really can have intrusive dreams and memories of the event, right? Like we spoke about, and this could also lead them of feeling detached and really put strains on relationships that previously were flourishing and when they were really close to their family members. Symptoms like depression or struggling to function in the day-to-day activities, detachment, avoidance, getting angry and startled quickly, it can make it really hard for everyone else in the home to live with that individual suffering from the trauma. So it requires unique skills and tools to heal from trauma and its effect on the family, but it is possible.
Okay, so you've spoken on the symptoms of trauma, how it comes about, how it affects family life. What can a person do to start the process of recovering from a traumatic event?
So for anyone that's listening that may be experiencing PTSD or from a traumatic event, especially, recently in Israel, the desire to get better and to want to heal is the first step, and it's an incredible start. And anyone that wants to get better should feel proud of themselves for wanting to take that step and not be ashamed of their feelings because they're completely normal considering, what they may have gone through. So it's a good idea to lean into your relationships. Practically, research has shown that therapy is an incredible option for those that want to, speak to a professional. Psychotherapy has proven to really help regulate emotions after a traumatic experience. There's a special type of therapy called EMDR or eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing. And that's a type of therapy that has proven really helpful for individuals suffering from PTSD, where they follow movement with their eyes while speaking about their experience. And it really changes the way they look at the experience and identify with it and how they look at themselves. So just some quick tips for any, young people listening. Um, Limit social media intake, which is classic, but really important, to spend time with friends outdoors in real life, and to really express gratitude for the positive aspects of their life and to lean into those. This is all the time that we have today, but thank you all for listening to our discussion of trauma, PTSD, its effect on the individual and the family as a whole. We hope it was informative and engaging. Thank you.